Hi, I'm Perdita Finn, and I am here today with the wonderful Kate Clinch, who I got to know in a prayer circle and who introduced me to someone who has become one of my most beloved saints on the other side and has taught me a lot about devotion and the power of the saints and how they can transform our lives. Kate, I'm delighted to have you with us. Kate has written an extraordinary book called Every Inch a Saint that's coming out from Monkfish in 2026. That's right, Kate?
Yes, in
And
April.
it is unputdownable. It is so compelling and moving and everything you want from a novel, just historically interesting, but so compelling about people's relationships and really thinking about what it means to be a saint. Kate also has a wonderful Substack. It's in her name, Kate Clinch, and where she talks about her devotion to this almost Australian saint we're going to talk about today. Welcome, Kate. I want to ask you first to introduce us to Eileen and then to tell us how you met her and how your relationship with her has developed, because it's an extraordinary relationship. And it's one that has meant a great deal personally to me, actually. So tell us who Eileen is. And she's not yet beatified by the church, I know, but tell us how you met her. Can you?
Okay. Well, Eileen was born in 1892, so the world was really different then. Just going back, there was a lot of tuberculosis and there were no antibiotics and there wasn't good anesthesia for surgery. So into that world, Eileen was born and contracted tuberculosis probably by the age of 3, at which point she started having problems with her back because tuberculosis has 2 forms. The one that we usually think of these days is a respiratory infection where it's a lung disease and it's really nasty and people waste away. But these days it's treatable with antibiotics. But there's another form which is more common in children who are infected very young, and that's where the infection spreads through the bloodstream and it can lodge in bones. And so it lodged in a number of her bones, particularly her spine. And when that happens, you get abscesses in the bones of your spine, which you can imagine is excruciatingly painful, but it also causes deformity in those bones and pressure on the spinal cord and inflammation in the nervous system. And that's what Eileen suffered from a very early age. So as a child, she had multiple back surgeries, presumably to drain abscesses, but also some to try and straighten her back. And none of that worked. So we had this very ill little child having terrible surgery with poor anesthesia and poor results. And she only grew to be 3'10", which is about 115 centimeters tall as a result of her illness and the deformity in her spine.
And I might add that Kate, you began your career as a doctor, right? So you have a real understanding of the kind of medical complexity and suffering that she would have experienced.
Yes, that's very true. And I also have multiple sclerosis in my family. So multiple sclerosis is very similar to a condition that Eileen had as a result of the inflammation in her spine called transverse myelitis. So yes, my medical background made a huge difference because well, yes, I could understand her, but also when I was working on the book and talking to Eileen's nuns, I was able to offer to write a medical report to assist with her cause because I could explain the medical condition and the effects it would have had on her. And part of the process of doing that was the most incredible experience was I got to look at copies of her x-rays.
Oh. And now
And
I almost feel like I want to circle back and say you have this child who has this horribly painful, terrible disease. that is, she could have become a hopeless victim for her whole life. And that's not what happened. That's not the story.
No, it's totally not the story. And it's worse than that as well, because not only did she have the illness, at the age of 19, her father died. And the family, who had been um, comfortably poor, as in sort of lower middle class, and affected by huge medical bills, because of course there wasn't universal health care, suddenly were plunged into real poverty. And that was a pivotal moment for her as well, because she became much sicker when her father died. And a priest was brought in to assist the family to find new living accommodation, and that was Father Ted McGrath. And he was a young priest. He was a rookie. He had a short stint as priest in New Zealand. Then he was brought across back to Sydney for his first Australian position. And he was asked to help find housing. And he was really struck with Eileen, and they formed this mutual friendship, admiration, and support system where they both saw in each other something really special. And they were both motivated because of their life experiences to care for the sick and the poor.
And is
And
that primarily why she's up for being sainted? Is yeah, her extraordinary work for the sick and in Australia?
yes, yes, she was partially paralyzed for a lot of her life.
Mhm.
And as sick as she was, but she and Father Ted co-founded an order of nurses to care for the sick poor in the slums of Sydney in 1913. And she did a lot of the work involved in that from her bed. Her legs weren't working and her right arm didn't work, but her left arm worked. And she had this telephone. She was a saint with a phone. Like, how cute is that?
I think with a telephone. I mean, one of the things you really bring out in your book about Eileen that makes her come so to life is that not only is she training this order of nurses, she's trying to educate them about what it means to take care of people with chronic pain and chronic illness, that how to have the empathy for these situations. And I was very moved by those passages in your book. As someone who has a daughter with a chronic illness that's been likened actually to tuberculosis, like as you say, MS is today, that I read recently a book that inflammatory conditions today are like TB was in the 19th century. We don't understand them. We don't know how to treat them, and, lupus, MS, and a lot of these chronic illnesses. And what you really capture in the book is that she's empowering these women to go out and be healers, but really empowering them spiritually as well as practically.
Yes. Now, the women that came to her as nurses were already Catholic and committed, because they were recruited because of that. So they already had a really sound spiritual basis. But yes, Eileen actually ended up being their spiritual director
Huh.
and took that job very, very seriously. And also, of course, Eileen was sick, and she was the centerpiece of the Order of Nurses, and they lived together. So the nurses went to work, and then they came home and they nursed Eileen. So it was constant, it was a constant theme. But it wasn't just about that, because Eileen never lost her joy.
Yeah.
She she had a dog, Rags, that she loved, who drove her matron insane, because this dog would always want to be up on the bed with muddy footprints and yeah.
Can I
But
share a picture of her because her face is just so compelling? And I know you behind you is a picture you've painted of her, and I
yes,
wanted just to share. I think I have it open. Let me see if I can find it. Um, Maybe I don't. My technical ability being what it is, we'll see. I may not. I will share it up this way because this is the picture I keep of Eileen. on my own altar. And if you see her smile, she's so radiant. There, I mean, just joyous. How did you meet her, Kate? How did you get to know her? How did your own relationship with her begin?
Well, it was a little bit serendipitous, as these things always are.
Right.
I love history. I'm interested in saints, but I was in Sydney, and because of my interest in, we have a saint, one saint in Australia, one declared saint, Mary MacKillop, and she started her career really in Adelaide, where I live. And so when I was in Sydney, I chose to go to her convent there because she ended her life in Sydney. And that's where she was buried. So I spent some time in the chapel. And I posted a picture on Facebook, just as you do. And someone that I knew, but not well, sent me a message and said, "Oh, if you like Mary, you need to go to Eileen's house." And here's a link. And I'd never heard of Eileen O'Connor. This would have been maybe 8 years ago now. I'm not sure. I've lost track. And so I was able to ring the convent that Eileen's house became, and you had to make an appointment to go. And so I was lucky enough on this trip to Sydney to be able to book an appointment. So I got caught a few buses and got myself there. And you can sit in the chapel at her house, which is made from her bedroom and the room behind it. And just sitting there was there was this incredible sense that I was in the presence of a saint. It was unmistakable.
And what was that? What was that feeling? Can you try to describe it? Because this is a synchronicity. You're called, but you answered the call, and you answered the call, and then you had an experience.
Yeah, it was really a sense of electricity and awe. And I just sat there thinking, this woman's a saint. And it was that simple, and it was fascinating. Like I was drawn and fascinated, and they had some biographies of her available in the chapel. So I was able to take a copy of each of those, and little prayer card and bookmarks with her photograph. And I brought all these home and just read everything. And then it stopped for a while. And then, because I write, and I'd written two previous novels by then and gone to a conference to pitch the novels, and I found that I couldn't pitch them because no one wanted to hear what I was offering. And it triggered some self-reflection and a few tears. But once the tears stopped and the self-reflection happened, what am I writing? What do I write? And I realized that what I really write is spiritual love stories. They're not romances, but they're spiritual love stories. And the ones that I'd written didn't quite hit the mark in the Australian publishing industry. And I thought, where do I have permission to write a spiritual love story that someone might take notice of? And it just dropped in Eileen. And so I went home from the conference and I started writing her story, and I started communicating with two of her beautiful nuns, one of whom has passed away since. And I was just so, so lucky that I started when these two wonderful women who carry her love were able to work with me on the research, read the manuscript, and just give me a sense of Eileen that I couldn't have got a few years later.
Huh. There are no coincidences here. I mean,
None. There
even
are no.
even the failure of those first two books is what prepared you to be, having had that experience myself, I know it's as if failure creates this energy for the real work that you have to do.
Yeah, and the coincidences go deeper because when I first started to communicate with the nuns, Sister Greta she was actually one of the congregational leaders, and she also was the person who championed Eileen's cause. She picked it up in the 90s and did an awful lot of work in the archives, and so she knew everything, Eileen, and just was so pure and so called. She was called to do what she was doing as well. And so she uh, very nicely and very gently grilled me quite a lot.
Uh-huh.
And well, to understand Eileen, you really have to understand MS because MS is like transverse myelitis, and that's what Greta had come to realize that Eileen had, not just the straight tuberculosis and the spinal damage. She had this inflammatory brain condition as well because she used to have periods of blindness and unconsciousness. And and I was able to say that I had experience
Wow.
with that. And and it was like at that point, resistance just melt like I'd crossed a hurdle, jumped a hurdle. And somehow that was when everything came together in terms of the support from the sisters and
With your
yeah.
own health troubles, have you called on Eileen for help?
Yes, it's inevitable. I think anyone who knows Eileen and has had an issue will call on her
I've called
because
on Eileen for help. That's why I've got her picture on my ancestor altar. And I personally experienced a miracle with her help this winter. I mean, I was in the hospital with pneumonia. They were convinced I had lung cancer from a node. They were all set to biopsy it and operate on me. And they stopped in the middle, literally before cutting into my chest, and said, "It's vanished." And they didn't know why. And I
yes,
said, "That feels like a miracle." And the radiologist said to me, "It seems like a miracle to me." Now I didn't get the doctor or the surgeon to admit it, but she sure did. And I really credited, the mother and Eileen with having done that for me because I was praying to her really hard.
yes, and I'm sure she's capable of miracles. She has one documented miracle from her lifetime. She's currently in the process of being investigated by the Vatican, where they're actually looking for miracles to confirm that they're on the right track. So we should seriously think about writing up yours, by the way.
Absolutely happy to do that. Happy to do that. I don't know if I'll get, the doctors, as you know, are very good at writing it off. you know, we'll see what they say. Um, and I think sometimes, a lot of times, it is that way with miracles. They can be explained away, but in your heart, like I knew I was so terrified of having that operation, and I didn't have to have it.
Yes.
you know
Yeah,
and and sometimes when something doesn't happen, it's also a miracle.
that's true.
How close is Eileen to being sainted?
I don't know, really. She was declared. It's a very complicated process.
I'm sure. I don't know.
Like, she was declared a servant of God in 2018, so that's kind of a foundational.
Yeah.
Yep, she's been investigated to find that she had heroic virtue and various other things. There's a huge amount of work that's been done through the Archdiocese of Sydney, and boxes of papers have actually made it as far as to the dicastery in the Vatican. So the next step is for the Vatican to look through all of that and see if miracles can be attributed to her in this process.
But one of the miracles is just you finding her and writing this book, this extraordinary book about her, and the love you feel for her. I mean, it seems like people get to know her and they fall in love with her, right? That's you're not the only one.
It's absolutely, it is impossible not to fall in love with this woman when you actually really start to appreciate what she went through and what she did. She breaks your heart open in the best way.
Yeah. That even in the midst of horrific suffering, suffering we can hardly imagine, that she was really trying to help others. And you talk about her, what a difference that group of nurses made in post World War I with the flu epidemic for poor people before the national health care. That she really did amazing works for other people.
Absolutely. Our new museum's just opened to her in
Really.
Sydney, and it's just beautiful. And it has little recordings of the nuns that I worked with, recalling what it was like when they were nursing. So we're talking late 50s, early 60s. So much after Eileen was on the scene. But Sister Margaret Mary was saying, well, yes, sometimes you'd get to a patient's home and the door would be locked. So you'd climb in through the window. And
Really.
and and the floor would have holes in it. So you were at risk of falling up to your waist through holes in the floor. So you had to pick your way around the holes in the floor. And then the first thing you would do before you could look after the patient was actually clean up the excrement of the dogs and the cats that were also in those slums.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's only 60 years ago. Eileen's work began before that amongst meth drinkers and people returned from World War One and all the horror stories that we can imagine.
Which you bring so vividly to life in your novel, from post-traumatic stress, from World War I to the horrors of the flu. I mean, these are really, I mean, it's almost feels channeled when I read it in your book. It's so vivid, that experience.
And the funny thing was, I was writing that Spanish flu thing, and then whenever it was, a year or so later, we hit COVID, and it was like,
Wow. So it was helpful to the writing process.
well, COVID happened after I'd written it all.
Wow.
And it just felt like, oh, I'm in a time warp.
Well, well, I mean, if you what would you tell people about Eileen? How would you recommend they get to know her? To how would they how do you answered a call, you went on pilgrimage, you read about her, you learned about her, you empathized with her through your own illness and experience. And how do you think Eileen can help people? She's even now, even from the other side.
Sister Greta said to me when I made contact with them after I'd jumped my hurdles, she said, Eileen could always get people to, when she needed something, she didn't use the word manifest, but Eileen could always bring the people she needed to do what she needed to have done. Like there were always benefactors or people that would help with the work. And she said, and it never stopped. And she genuinely believed and said to me, you know, God has brought you to this. Eileen has asked you to do this. Like she was convinced.
I'm
And
always
so,
I'm completely convinced that you have shown up to write this book for her.
yes, it was a setup.
But also but a mutual, and I think this is the thing about our relationships with the saints. I mean, I look at you too. She's also brought you tremendous joy and tremendous, I mean, she has answered your prayers. You've been the answer to her prayers. It's
Yes,
back and
yes.
forth. And you're the answer to
It,
our prayers because we get to know her, we get to be intimate with her, we get to ask for her help, we get to learn about this incredible person. She's a real friend to people dealing with chronic illness, I think.
I'd agree with that for sure. Yes, she particularly for poverty and sort of chronic serious illness, but she has space in her heart for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I know she's not officially sainted, but I think you think she's already a saint. She's already a saint for you, isn't she?
Absolutely. Yes. I don't have influence at the Vatican, but I think
You should.
that
Hey.
there are saints and there are saints that pass the paperwork.
Right. And
And yes,
what is that definition for you of what that is and what that means from her? From the first time you met her and encountered her.
that's really hard because you can't really put it into words. It's a feeling. You feel it in your heart and your bones. It's like I said before, there's electricity and there's awe. Yeah, and love. You can feel this force of grace and this force of nature,
Mm.
and that's what she is. And you asked, how can people get to know Eileen? Yes, I've been able to visit where she is, but I think just a little bit of information, and as you said, looking at a picture. So Google Eileen O'Connor or go to my Substack or my website. I do have a few little articles that are just little distillations of parts of her life, and there are pictures there, including the picture I painted of her, which was a story in itself because I don't usually paint. And I've played.
But that's a traditional thing that begins to happen when people fall in love with a saint. They write about them, they paint them the icon. The icon is a
Yes.
tradition, and the picture behind you, you needed to bring her through and paint, right?
Well, I'm pretty sure she wanted me to bring her through. She wanted me to paint her. And so I'm kind of, having this to and fro. I can't paint a portrait. I've never painted a portrait. Well, just paint, no piece. Okay, I'll paint I'll do a practice one. So I do a practice one, realize that it's the one, wished I'd centered it better on the paper, all the things that you could have done better. Um, and it was like, well, it's going to look all right on the cover of a book. And so I think, yeah, with any luck, that'll be the image on her book, but that's up to the publishers. But yeah, they have a copy of the painting, so we'll see.
This is the thing when people fall in love with a saint, the saints start bringing our creativity out of us. We're painting, we're writing, we're making things, and it all flows out of our love and our devotion. And we've forgotten the power of devotion to draw forth our creativity from us. And, I mean, I think that's one of the things I find so beautiful about your story. Yes, she's a healer. Yes, she's someone with a tremendous sense of care and love for the poor and the sick, but she also can heal us in ways we can't even imagine by making us creative. And I mean, that's what I've seen again and again when people fall in love with a saint. It's almost as if they bring us into bloom.
Yes, it's a life-changing experience.
Yeah. Well, I hope, Kate, you're going to be doing a US book tour for Every Inch of Saint. I've got my fingers crossed. But I'm going to be telling everyone to read it, write it down, pre-order it, and maybe we'll do another event together. I'm sure we'll be doing a lot of events around it because it's a wonderful book. It's about Eileen and it's about the community. I learned so much about Australia during this period of time. I felt like I was there. There are many characters in this book, and it's a real sense of what it was like to be alive, and just how one person can really affect profound change and love and healing in the world.
Yes. And pass it on. That's the thing about Eileen. She passes it on. It was so obvious to me when I was speaking to Sister Margaret Mary. She had this smile,
Mhm.
and her um, she's just here behind me. She's the nun that passed away. And she had this smile that was Eileen's smile. Like I felt like Eileen had had this smile and she had passed the smile on through her nuns. Margaret Mary obviously never met Eileen because Eileen died in 1921, but she worked with the first generation of nurses. And so there's a line in the book, when Eileen smiles at you, you really know you've been smiled at.
Well, I just want to say, Kate, I'm looking at your face on the Zoom, and that smile radiates through you, and I feel it in my heart. And I just want to thank you so much for talking with us today and sharing Eileen. And I thank you for sharing her with me. I mean, I've fallen in love with her through you, and felt like I've gotten to know her. She's definitely one of the saints in my crowd here behind me. And I hope that other people will fall. I know that you're going to share that smile with everyone, and lots of people are going to learn how special she is. Big thanks to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.